Good evening, everyone. My name is Brendan Parlett, and I'm a parishioner here at St. Charles. I've been a parishioner here for about 2 years now, and tonight I was invited to give my testimony. So my testimony is both a conversion story and a vocation story, since as of about a couple months ago, I was accepted into seminary for the Archdiocese of Washington. So tonight I want to talk about how Jesus has worked in my life, both through conversion and vocation, and how that was primarily done in my search for joy. So by ways of introduction, I'm originally from the great neighboring state of Maryland. I grew up in Crofton, just outside of Annapolis, and I grew up with a family life likely familiar to many of you. Large Catholic family. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, and the Catholic faith was very present growing up. We would go to Mass every Sunday, pray before meals, CCD each week, and youth group as we grew older. But though the Catholic faith was very present growing up, I didn't really know Jesus. I liked the way going to Mass made me feel, but other than going to Mass and a few retreats, it didn't grow in my faith, and I didn't push myself to do so. So towards the end of high school and heading into college, my faith began to fade. I attended the University of Maryland, where I studied mechanical engineering. In the first couple of years, I really focused on my studies. I had gone to the Catholic Student Center a few times, but I'd stopped going there. I didn't really know anyone, and it was all the way across campus, so I made the excuse that it was too far. As a result, most of the friends I ended up making weren't Catholic, and so as we would hang out and go out together, I didn't practice my faith. I saw that they were happy, and if they didn't need the faith, why would I need it? So on weekends, I started to get involved in the party scene at Maryland. This is what my friends were interested in, and it seemed to make them happy, so I felt that I should try this out. And for a while, I actually liked it. And this went on for a couple years. And so I was actually looking for happiness, and I did find it in fleeting moments, but it was never satisfying. Something that I could never find in these things that I was doing. And I didn't know this at the time, and I didn't want to realize it. But joy is a gift from God, and I was never going to find it in these activities on weekends that I was doing. And I could only ever obtain this joy through a relationship with Jesus Christ. But again, I didn't know this at the time, and so it went on for a couple more semesters. And by the second semester of my junior year, I was still in this monotonous lifestyle. Studies during the week, partying on weekends, and I became very unhappy. Until one day, something out of the ordinary happened. I got a phone call in the middle of the day from my dad, it wasn't out of the ordinary for my dad to call me, but when it was in the middle of the day, he was at work and I was at school. I knew there was something wrong. So I answered the phone to see what was up. And he told me that someone very close to me back home had attempted suicide. And this crushed me. I didn't know where to go. And I felt helpless. I felt helpless to the situation, and I felt alone in my grief. I didn't know who to turn to in this moment. Though I had made all these friends through the past couple of years, there was no deeper relationship, and I felt alone. And so it was in this moment, for the first time in a long time, that I turned to the Father. I prayed for the first time in 3 years. But it wasn't a thankful prayer at first, it was anger. I was angry with God that he had let something like this happen to me, to this person that I cared so deeply. But in the end, I ended up praying that they would keep this person safe. And so that Sunday, I went to Mass. Something I hadn't done on campus in the first time, in a long time. This was the first time in a few years. After Mass, I felt at peace, something so strange to me at that time. I'd experienced God's truly merciful and generous love. And it was after that moment that the idea grew that I would have something to turn to, something that could be a serious part of my life, a way to receive this consolation, this peace, and one day, hopefully, joy. So after this experience of God meeting me in my suffering, I started to become interested in the Catholic faith in a way I hadn't growing up. I started listening to podcasts such as Catholic Stuff You Should Know and Bishop Barron's Word on Fire. I started to read the Gospels, and I began to understand how the things that I'd been taught in CCD and by my parents so long ago could apply to my life now. I began to move away from the lifestyle I was living. It was boring now, and it couldn't bring me the peace that I had experienced after encountering Jesus. The only thing that really interested me was learning about him. So as I entered my senior year, I remember going to confession one day with the chaplain, Father Rob Walsh. And after confession, he mentioned one thing to me. And he said, "You know, there are great guys at the Catholic Student Center." He had recognized in me that I didn't have the community I needed to grow in faith, that I had this desire to know Jesus, but I didn't have anyone around me to help me with that. To be honest, I didn't believe him at first. I'd avoided the CSC since my freshman year, and I didn't think there would be guys that I want to be around, let alone be friends with. And at some level, I didn't think I could belong there after the lifestyle I'd been living. But despite these fears, I reached out to the campus minister, and he got me involved in a small group at the Catholic Student Center. And it was here that I met a group of men that lived an authentic Catholic life, even while in college. And this was something that I admired. I wanted to be like these guys. They were actually great. And I wanted to join them in their mission to find Jesus. So after joining this small group, I started to remove different sins from my life. I had started going back to Mass, even daily Mass here and there. And I had found a love for Jesus that I had been missing since I was younger. And it was through this community that this love continued to grow. As Holy Week came around, I remember sitting in Holy Thursday Mass while Father Rob was preaching during the homily, and this stillness came over me. This inexplicable but distinct warmth and happiness came over me. I was feeling true joy. This joy was truly a gift of the Holy Spirit, and one that I could have only ever found in a relationship with Jesus. Something that I was searching for 3 years, but one was not able to find in all these different things I was doing. I had a sense that I was home in the Catholic Church, and that there was no other place that I would want to be. And so I knew that I had to continue to give my life to him in whatever ways possible. So I graduated from the University of Maryland, and in the fall of 2018, I moved here to Arlington and became a parishioner here at St. Charles. I had this great reversion in college, and I wanted to continue it here. But even though I had this desire, I didn't form a community right away. I went to Mass, but I wasn't really involved, and I was mostly focused on my new job in technical consulting. I was happy with my state in life. I had made friends here, I had a good job, and even a decent prayer life. But what I hadn't even remotely considered was my vocation. I had always assumed I was going to have a large family and get married, and never really considered any other option. But then this weird thing started to happen. I would go to Mass on Sunday, and I would see Father Planty and Father Dyer celebrating the Mass at the altar. And I would have these moments where I would think to myself, wow, I want to do that. And these moments would be filled with happiness and a peace, something that I couldn't explain. And so most people would, take these seriously, but naturally I pushed these feelings aside. I had a great job and a great community here. Why would I want anything else? But it was in that time that a heartfelt desire for the priesthood started. And these joyful moments would continue. Moments where I would want to be a priest, but I couldn't explain why. So as the months went on, it grew. But I still didn't reach out to anyone about it until one day I got to know Father Don. One day after P3, he actually reached out to me and asked if I wanted to get coffee. I didn't know him at the time, and I thought it was kind of weird that he was reaching out to me, but I agreed. And so we met for coffee, and I ended up pouring out all these things that had happened to me, both in college and in these moments here in Arlington, these thoughts of the priesthood. And at the end of this conversation, I ended up actually asking him to be my spiritual director. And thankfully, he agreed. Father Don helped me form a rule of life centered on encountering Christ in mental prayer. He truly became a mentor for me, and it really changed my spiritual life. He encouraged me to get involved at the parish. If I was to discern the priesthood in any meaningful way, I really need to see what it was like to be involved with his church. And so I got involved, and I joined a small group, shout out to the Sons of Thunder, and I got involved with Dinner for All, coffee hour on the weekends, and started to usher each weekend as well. So I finally found a community here at St. Charles and in Christ Church. That winter, I went on a seminary visit up to Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg. And it was after that visit, I went with a couple of friends from college, that one of my friends mentioned to me that I should go on the Archdiocese of Washington discernment retreat. And I said, I'd think about it, but I didn't really have any intention on going. But as the weekend approached, the weekend prior, I was just kept up all night thinking about how I should go on this retreat. But all these different fears started to come up. 100 reasons why I could not possibly be a priest, why I shouldn't go on this retreat. I'm not holy enough. I don't like speaking in front of people. I have this great job. Why would God want anything else for me? But the next morning, I ended up calling a priest friend of mine, Father Connor Sullivan, to talk about what had gone on. And so I started listing out all these reasons of why I could not possibly be a priest or not even go on this retreat. And then he just asked me, are any of these good reasons? And I said no. He asked me, what should you do? And I agreed that, I should sign up for this discernment retreat. So I went on this retreat, not really expecting to get a ton out of it, even though I had this desire to go. And I ended up meeting with the vocations director, Father Mark Ivany. And I didn't even intend on having a meeting with him that weekend. But after this meeting, similar to my meeting with Father Don, I started pouring out all these things, all these moments in my life where I thought that maybe God may be calling me to the priesthood. And so after that meeting, he invited me to keep in touch and to take this seriously to prayer. And it was after that weekend, after this conversation, that I knew I had to take this desire seriously. To discern if this desire and this love for the priesthood was of myself, maybe it was just an admiration for the priesthood, or was it the will of God? Did he give me this desire for the priesthood because he could be calling me to this? So a few months later, in the summer of 2019, I was invited on a pilgrimage to Guadalupe. The few months prior to this had actually been difficult for me. I knew I had this desire, and I was really starting to fall in love with the priesthood, but I still didn't have the confidence that this is what God was calling me to. It was difficult for me to see myself potentially as his priest. I've been told by my friends who had been previously to Guadalupe that there were special graces there. And so I took this time to really pray for my vocation. I prayed to receive clarity in what God's will was for me and what his plan was to truly make me happy. And so I decided to pray a novena to Saint Therese. I asked for her intercession to pray for my vocation, in that if the Lord wanted me to go to seminary to be his priest, that she would send me a red rose. And I didn't really expect this to happen, but I had a desire. I still wanted this. So I finished the novena and I arrived in Guadalupe. And the first thing we did when we got there is we had Mass at the Basilica. And I remember during Mass just praying before Our Lady, displayed on the miraculous tilma, and really laying down my vocation before her. Entrusting in her, my vocation, and knowing that if I was really all in for God's will, and whatever that may be, that meant surrendering to it. whether that vocation may be priesthood or marriage. And so after Mass, we left the Basilica, and the missionary who was leading us on the pilgrimage said that he had a gift for us, something that he couldn't get very often. And what he had in his hand was a handful of roses. He had gotten them from a bouquet that was touched to the tilma that morning, and he started handing them out to each of us. And so he handed out the roses one by one, and each of the men on the trip got a white rose. And as I looked down, and in my hand, I had received a red one. And so naturally, with my technical mind, I started rationalizing this. Everyone gets a rose in Guadalupe. It didn't matter that I was praying for this for 9 days. But when I started to reflect on it, I thought that maybe God had actually given me a sign. But I really wasn't convinced. On the last day of the pilgrimage, we had adoration of the Blessed Sacrament at the convent we were staying at. And in prayer that evening, I reflected on the sign I had received, and it brought me joy. But in reflecting on this also, all those fears of the priesthood were brought to the surface, fears I'd been holding on since the beginning of my discernment. And then there was this moment that to this day I can't exactly explain. The only way I can describe it is that I had this overwhelming feeling, this feeling of forgiveness and love and sonship in the Father. A confirmation that despite all the sins I had committed in the past, despite any of the fears I had of priesthood, that the Lord desired this for me, that He loved me. I'd had an overwhelming experience of joy in Jesus' presence. And after this experience in prayer, after having this novena answered, and having a love for the priesthood that had continued to grow over the past year, I knew at this point that the only way to continue that discernment was to apply for seminary. And so I returned from Mexico. I was excited about the possibility of applying to seminary, and I really wanted to go that fall. So I had spiritual direction to discuss what had happened, and I was encouraged to take it to prayer, to see what the Lord wanted me to do right then. Maybe it was His will for me to be His priest, but maybe He didn't want me to go to seminary right then. And as it turned out, in taking it to prayer, I had this sense that I needed to wait and to take this year in Arlington to continue my discernment. And that was tough for me. I wanted to apply right then. It meant that if I was really willing to do all that God asked of me, that even meant waiting to apply to seminary. At the time, I talked to a parishioner here, Mike Sampson, who was about to enter seminary for that fall. And he gave me some great advice to pray the litany of trust, to trust in God's will and be assured that in the coming year, there would be many graces. If I was following His will, He's not going to leave me by myself. And yet this was still tough for me to believe at the time, but it couldn't have been more true. In the past year, I've experienced many graces. I've formed close relationships to people I didn't expect. I've been blessed to help get others interested in the faith, and I've grown more confident that God may be calling me to the priesthood. The desire for the priesthood that started almost 2 years ago still remains. And after taking this extra time for discernment a few months ago, I ended up applying to seminary for the Archdiocese of Washington, and thanks be to God, I was accepted. And I could not be more excited for this fall. Even with this great blessing, the most important thing that has happened to me in this past year is learning how to truly have a personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus desires to be invited into every part of our lives, not just the difficult moments, the moments of suffering that I had in college, or the big moments in our life, such as vocation, but He desires to be invited into the smallest moments, and to be there with us, and to love us in those moments, and to bring us joy. Though we won't experience this perfect joy until we are united with the Father in the heavenly kingdom, He does wish for us to receive it here. Let us pray that we may desire this joy, that we find joy in his life through mental prayer of his holy word, and that we may desire to share his love with others, and that we may continue to seek and find joy in Jesus Christ. Thank you all for listening this evening. I invite you all to join us for Zoom pub time at 8:30 following this video, and the link will be listed in the description. Thank you all again for listening, and God bless.